Economic opportunity. Does it still exist in this country? Does it exist in our state? In your community? Within your company? And as we zoom out today, let's focus on, does it exist in each of our 72 counties? Well, let's get to know each other a little bit again. My name's Wade Goodsell. I have the privilege of being the executive director of the WMC Foundation. In 2012, I married my incredibly talented and patient bride, Kristen. In 2015, our son Carter came along, the pride of my life. And in 2017, our little firecracker, Tegan, came along, the joy of my life. The Goodsells, we call Sun Prairie, Wisconsin home. And if you're in Sun Prairie, or if you're in Brookfield, or Mequon, or Neenah, or Appleton, or Green Bay, or De Pere, or Wausau, or Schofield, La Crosse, or Eau Claire, life is probably pretty good. But what if you go 2 hours north of here? You take Highway 22 2 hours north and you get to Waushara County. You go to Wild Rose, Wisconsin. What does your economic future look like if you're Carter Goodsell, the class of 2033 at Wild Rose High School? What does your economic future look like if you're Tegan, class of 2035 at Wild Rose High School? Do you have the same opportunities and the same economic opportunity in Waushara County as you do here in Dane County? But before we lean in further to that question of economic opportunity and what we consider our urban and rural divide in this state, let's first zoom out and take a look in kind of table setting for today's session on where we are in regards to the national economy. So I don't know where you were in September 2010, but now that we know each other, I was busy falling in love. That's what I was doing in September 2010. If you fast forward for 110 consecutive months through November of this year, the U.S. economy has continued to add jobs. Let us not lose sight of that. Probably the more podcasts, blogs, news you watch, read, listen to, we may lose sight of this. The U.S. economy, and especially our labor market, continues to expand for 110 consecutive months. Do you remember where you were in October of 2009? U.S. unemployment peaked at 10%. In Wisconsin, our peak unemployment coming out of the Great Recession, or still in its midst, was in January of 2010 at 9.3%. You see the October numbers on the screen. The November numbers in the United States, unemployment was 3.5%. In Wisconsin, through the last decade, we've continued to be below the national average, and in November, we were at 3.3%. Taking a look at three leading growth indicators, whether that's job growth, wage growth, and GDP growth. When you look out through a 10-year lens and you narrow that to a 5-year lens, and then you zoom into a 1-year lens, Wisconsin continues to be more competitive in each of those three growth areas, whether that's job, wage, or GDP. The data through the 10-year lens from 2008 to 2018 would say we are stronger today than we were a decade ago. So let's look at employment gains here in the state by sector through a 5-year lens of 2013 through 2018. We have had employment growth in each of the sectors in our state economy, except for government. And I suppose whether you look at government expansion or contraction as a positive or negative thing probably depends upon your view of the world. But we have had economic expansion in terms of employment opportunities in each of the sectors in our state economy over the last 5 years. However, as the graph indicates, trailing the national average in every one of those sectors. Again, looking out through that 10-year lens, whether that's 2008 to 2018, our average annual job growth in the state is 3.7%. That's average annual job growth. However, as the red on the map denotes, 30 of our 72 counties now have fewer employment opportunities than they did in 2008. So that's a little bit of a drive-by as it relates to the national economy, as it relates to the labor market, both in Wisconsin and in our country. So let's talk a little bit about talent, people, and demographics. If you've attended the Future Wisconsin Summits, if you've had the misfortune of hearing me speak previously, one of the slides that we use, this is Department of Administration numbers, looking at the state's labor force growth rate, or lack thereof, over a 20-year lens, and that lens is 2015 to 2035. Obviously, we're now about 5 years into that projection, and the projection has us down nearly a point, nearly a 1% loss in labor force. However, if you look at the red on that map, counties that are projected to lose population, 50 of our 72 counties are projected to lose jobs, not population, projected to lose jobs and have fewer jobs in 2035 than they did in 2015. Quite damning. Again, you zoom out and you look at the US annual rates of labor force growth. It's slowing. The annual rate of growth peaked when looking at the 60s and 70s at a 2.6% annual rate of growth, riding the wave of the baby boom. Well, fast forward to the middle of this decade, defined as 2015 to 2025, 0.2%, where I come from, that's essentially stagnation. The labor force across the country is not expected to grow until at least the middle of next decade, and in Wisconsin, as the prior slide indicated, through 2035, our workforce is expected to contract by a point. Well, before it gets better, it gets worse. Let's talk fertility rates. Even through a 20-year lens, regardless of racial group, women in this country on average are having one less child per woman than we did even 20 years ago. You see the spike at about 3.75 children per woman in the late 50s, early 60s, thus the baby boom. But as recently as 2007, we had what economists and demographers would consider just about replacement level birth rates. So in 2007, birth rates in this country were 2.06 per woman, children per woman. Fast forward a decade to 2017, and that number is now 1.76 children per woman. This chart is alarming. And like I said, it gets worse before it gets better. When looking at mobility rates through a nearly 30-year lens, and we talk mobility, we're not just talking about folks coming to Wisconsin, fleeing Illinois, come to the land of milk and honey. When we talk mobility rates, we're just simply talking about people that change addresses at least once within the year. As recently as 1990, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 people, about 18% of Americans moved within a given year. Fast forward to 2018, nearly 30 years, that mobility rate has been cut in half. It's only 10.1% of Americans. As a nation, we're now less mobile than we've ever been in our nation's history. Only 1 in 10 of us change addresses and change communities within a given year. Many of you may have seen this. I saw an article highlighting and kind of putting into quadrants U.S. Census Bureau data, 4 quadrants. So I'll give you guys the good news. The good news is Wisconsin is not in the bottom left quadrant, the Viking purples color. We've avoided that. Where you want to be is in the top right quadrant in the yellow. Where we are is in the orange. And the premise is this. There's 2 types of states. Well, I should say there's 3 types of states. There's sticky states, magnetic states, the third type being you're neither sticky or magnetic, which is the death purple, and then where you want to be is you're both sticky and magnetic. The good news is you aggregate all the Census Bureau, all the charts I showed you, all the charts I will show you, we're a sticky state. Once we have you, you probably will stay here. Once you become the Goodsells and you don't have a white picket fence, but you have a wood cedar fence, you're probably here. The bad news is we're not yet magnetic. Well, but we're making progress. So here's the good news. Kurt alluded to this in his opening remarks. After a decade of negative migration into Wisconsin. When we talk migration, we're not talking births and we're not talking deaths. We're talking those who move into Wisconsin and those who move out of Wisconsin. That's what we mean by migration. So after a decade of net negative out-migration, more people leaving our state than coming to our state, we now have positive in-migration for the second straight year. In 2018, those numbers were 7,040 people coming to the state of Wisconsin. As you drill deeper into those numbers, where are people coming from? This slide only shows where they come from, not where they left to. But where they're coming from, certainly they're fleeing Minnesota, they're fleeing Illinois. Yes, we have better football. Yes, we have a better fiscal climate. But don't miss, at the far right on that chart, the international influx into our state. Because if we just looked at migration numbers by domestic patterns, those that come to Wisconsin from other states or those that leave for other states, we would still be at a net loss of 1,000 people. But because of international migration into our state last year, international migration that was net 8,000, so if you think I'm no CPA, but if you go net 8,000 internationally, net negative 1,000 domestically, it gives you 7,000 person net positive migration numbers. That is good news, and that is a reason for hope. Before we can solve the puzzle, I think we need to stop the bleeding, and doing it in back-to-back years is a very good thing. This is a little bit of a mixed bag. When we talk about labor force participation rate, it's a mixed bag. The good is, if you're like me and you consider Wisconsin home, we take some pride in our work ethic in this state. I think many of you who are employers probably take pride in your Wisconsin facility. Probably is just as productive, if not more productive, than other facilities within your portfolio around the country or around the globe. We're productive in this state. We pride ourselves on being workers. The good news is, we're one of the top 5 or 6 states in the country in terms of labor force participation rate at 68%. We're 5 points better than the national average. The bad news is, every time, so I'll just steal the thunder on this. Every time we present on this slide, we're asked, Wade, what's up with the other 32%? So when we talk about labor force participation rate, we're talking about 16 to 64-year-olds. So certainly there's the boomers that have made their money, they've left the workforce early. Certainly there's the spouses or the parents that say, no, we're going to be homemakers or we're going to stay home. But probably the driving reason on why the labor force participation rate is not higher, it's within that bottom section of the spectrum between 16 to 23-year-olds. The lack of part-time workers, the thought that we're pursuing education on a full-time basis and I may not be working in the summer. Or I may not be pursuing a full-time degree and I might not be working 15 hours a week. That's what really impacts these numbers. So the good news is in this state we work. The hard news is it's not like there's hundreds of thousands of people on the sidelines. That's not the case. That number is more like 10,000 or a few tens of thousands, certainly not hundreds of thousands. So we've talked jobs, we've talked economy, we've talked talent and people. Let's get to a little bit of trends, what we're seeing and especially where the puck is moving. So to summarize our first 15 minutes together, despite an overall good economy, people, wealth, and jobs continue to concentrate in urban centers across the country. We think as you zoom out across the U.S., you really can find 3 common themes of 3 different policy conundrums. In Wisconsin, I don't think we're any different. In fact, I think these 3 conundrums are probably relevant in most communities across the state, if not the country. The first being workforce. And at WMC, anytime we talk workforce, we're talking 2 things. It's body gap and it's skills gap. It's quantity and quality. Second thing is healthcare. Kurt teased this out in his opening remarks. When we talk healthcare, it's both cost and accessibility. Thankfully, in our state, access isn't as much as an issue, but we continue to hear in our biannual CEO survey, cost most certainly is. And then we get to this third issue. And this is really where our day is focused today. This premise of, does economic opportunity exist across the state? With uneven growth amongst urban and rural America, and certainly here in Wisconsin, we consider that the urban and rural divide. So although non-metro parts of the country have gained jobs back since the Great Recession, if you follow that chart over over a dozen years, non-metro parts of this country have not yet fully gained back the jobs that they lost during the Great Recession. Let me say that again. If you live in a non-metro part of this country, on average, your community probably has not yet regained employment levels that you had prior to 2008. Another slide to illustrate this is population growth. As you map the U.S. national average for population growth, metro versus non-metro, essentially non-metro parts of the country have trailed their metro colleagues and peers for essentially 40 years. So we're left with this question: what is rural? As we've gone across the state, essentially, I'll leave you with this. I'll give you my definition. You know rural when you see it. If you want to know if an employer is rural, if you want to know if someone's from a small town or a rural community, just ask. You know it when you see it. And so this map gives you a feel for all of the rural communities and counties across the United States. In Wisconsin, we have a unique dichotomy where 30% of our residents are rural and 97% of our landmass. 30% of our people, 95% of our land. Do you think that creates some interesting cost-benefit analysis for public policy makers at the State House? Do you think that impacts infrastructure and investment decisions? Oh, goodness. And in Wisconsin, we're unique. We're often compared, whether you're trying to find a positive argument or a negative argument on economics or overall state economy and state vibrancy and economic health. We're often compared to Minnesota and Illinois. One of the things that I think is a unique advantage that we have here in our state is our strong micropolitan areas. That's a profound advantage that we have here in Wisconsin, is our strong micropolitan communities. And I think one of the things with those micropolitan communities, and our hope in this work, is that it's not so much an urban and rural divide, that it can become an urban and rural connectivity, where you can choose a community, you can choose a lifestyle, and still have access to economic opportunity. So as we zoom out at the state and we look at it again through 72 counties in our state, 33 counties across the state are considered rural or non-metro. I showed this slide similar, comparing the U.S. economy versus the national economy through five-year forecast on job growth. This compares the rural economy versus the statewide economy in job growth. The good news is rural Wisconsin job growth exceeds the state average in manufacturing and government. Again, maybe how you look at those government numbers probably depends upon your viewpoint of the world. The hard news is, in every other sector in the state, industry in our state, the rural communities in Wisconsin trailed the Wisconsin average over the last 5 years by about half. Obviously, this is concerning. When we look at the economy, when we look at the labor markets, when we look at the demographics, the talent, and the trends, this is concerning to us. This was Kurt's vision a year ago. We thought that this conversation of an urban and rural divide, or the need for more connectivity, we thought this was a conversation that no one was having and needed to be had across the state. That's really the strength of our project and the Future Wisconsin project. We can bring industry and industry executives to the same table as governmental and academic leaders. So we thought, okay, rather than just looking at slides, rather than researching best practices, it might be a good idea to get out of Madison. What do you think? So we got in the car and we engaged with 150 stakeholders across the state, and we held town hall listening sessions. So before I aggregate what we heard, just a few common refrains. If you live in a community and you choose to call that place home, you probably love that. We heard the same thing on small towns and rural communities. People love their community. They're proud of it. They like their job and they like their quality of life. The numbers on the 5-year job growth between 13 and 18 illustrate this point. Anchor businesses are critical to small community prosperity. Certainly not exclusively manufacturers, but in our state, probably predominantly manufacturers. Anchor employers, not just for the economic impact in the community, but I would say also the philanthropic impact and the leadership impact in those communities. That's, again, part of the strength of our micropolitan and some of our rural communities, and why rural manufacturing is able to grow at nearly double the rate of Wisconsin manufacturing in terms of employment over the past 5 years. Additionally, similar to the rest of the state, finding enough people, enough skilled people, and then retaining the young professionals, that's nothing new. That's a national problem. That's not just a Wisconsin problem, and it's certainly amplified in rural parts of the state. And then Kurt teased this out in his opening remarks, but we really heard 4 key things. Workforce we heard so often and so loud and in so many different ways, that probably could have been 1, 2, 3, and 4, but what fun would that have been? So probably the 4 things, not probably, certainly the 4 leading things that we heard were workforce, housing, both cost and availability, depending upon the community. The third being broadband. And then the fourth, something that really surprised us, is this, to use a fancy consulting term, lack of institutional capacity. I'll just call it leadership. Where if you're in Washura County, or if you're in a smaller county in the state, folks that can be our leaders, that can be our conveners, that can be our messengers and highlighters of best practices. If I'm the chamber professional, the economic developer, and the downtown Main Street coordinator, and oh, by the way, I'm paid to work 3/4 time, it's hard to be the convener of business, government, and academia when you're pulled in that many different directions and you're tasked with doing it 30 hours a week. We see those constraints in some of the smaller communities in the state, and we heard from a lot of those leaders. So this leads us a little bit to today. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, I'm certainly no Vikings fan. I dang sure am no Bears fan. And now that we know each other, the one thing I bought myself before marriage was 1 share of the 13-time world champion Green Bay Packers. So not only am I a super fan, I'm a proud shareholder and owner of America's team. But when I show you this slide and we see Rodgers and Alexander and Crosby, I don't want you to think football. Well, not just Packers football. What I want you to think is offense, defense, and special teams. Because as Kurt alluded to, for the first time in the 37-year history of our foundation in March of this year, the Future Wisconsin put out our Wisconsin Workforce Report. Each of you have a copy of it at your seat. I'll save you the 27 pages. I'll save you the 6 recommendations. And when you boil it down, it's really 3 things that we're chasing after. It's talent attraction. We're fortunate today to have WEDC's relatively new secretary and CEO, Missy Hughes, to talk about her first 60 days at WEDC, her vision for the organization, as well as an update on their talent attraction campaigns. When we talk talent retention, and probably even more specifically and better term, talent development, one of our key partners in the WMC Foundation and a national group that we think is a best practice is Project Lead the Way, the leading STEM education program K through 12 in the country. We're fortunate to have their national president and CEO, Dr. Vince Bertram, keynoting this morning. And then throughout the day, we're going to have sessions on the ag economy. Certainly across the country and in Wisconsin, this is amplified. The correlation between ag and rural is undeniable. The correlation between ag in our country, ag and the state economy, undeniable. So we're going to talk about ag, and we're going to have a few rural executives, not just talking about the challenges in their community, but the opportunities in their community as rural employers. And then we're going to close the day talking about special teams. 3.3% unemployment is a great thing if you're a political leader. If you're running for governor and you're politicking for re-election, that's probably a really good thing. But if you're an employer tasked with finding your next generation of workforce, and maybe not even your next generation, just next month, and if you're in education and you're thinking about your future enrollment numbers, if you're in government and you're wondering, how can we support this level of services with a dwindling tax base? The demographic problems in this state and the tight labor market are a real concern. And one of the things that we're seeing our members and companies across state start to do and start to consider is what I consider special teams. It's talent reintegration. How do we play on all corners of the field to ensure that we're not missing anyone? We're not screening anyone out of our hiring process. And today's session is going to have some criminal justice reform as well as some reintegration into the workforce, those with a criminal background. It might not be a fit for all employers, but if it's something, if you're not chasing down that path, it may be something to consider. So it gets us a little bit to what is our role in all of this work? I'm fortunate to lead this foundation. I'm thankful with our pretty dynamic steering committee to have a say in this work. And really, we look at our role as just 5 things. First, we want to be the facilitator. It's days like today. You get enough smart people in the room from different geographies, different industries, different perspectives, and all 3 legs of the stool: industry, academia, and government. And we just want to be the facilitator. We want to be the big tent for the state of Wisconsin, that we can get together and be honest about our problems, but not just talk about our problems, be data-driven in those problems and solution-oriented in our recommendations. Secondly, we want to be the advocate. And this isn't so much the WMC Foundation. This is much more so my colleagues and our 7 full-time lobbyists within WMC. Once we identify recommendations or best practices, either in our state or in our country, how do we chase those down and work to implement those? Third, we want to be the scorekeeper. Quite simply, measure what matters. We can't talk only about migration numbers when they're positive. We need to look ourselves in the mirror and have conversations when they're not where we'd like. Fourth, days like today, the communicator. Identify best practices and opportunities. If it's working for them, it may just work for you. And fifth, probably my favorite role in having the opportunity to work in this organization and do this work, is the voice of opportunity. Each year, our WMC Foundation puts 3,500 high school students through our Wisconsin Business World program. This year, we'll probably be in 35 communities across the state. And our premise is quite simple. It's only 2 things: whether we're with the students for 4 days, 3 nights at our summer camps, or we're with them for 6 hours during our 1-day program. Our message is only 2 things. First, business is a force for good. Without free enterprise, I don't know that there'd be an American middle class. And our second message is, regardless of what community you're in, regardless of the 72 counties, whether you're in Monroe or you're in Manitowoc, whether Tomahawk or Beloit, I've been to most of the counties, as I'm sure many of you have, and met with CEOs in most of them. There is economic opportunity in this state. You don't have to go to Austin. You don't have to go out to Boulder. You don't have to fly out to Boston. You can stay right here in the state of Wisconsin and have economic opportunities. And we want to be the voice of that opportunity to middle school and high school students. We're not the only ones doing this. We have a lot of partners in this work and a lot of folks that are even further developed than we are. But being the voice of opportunity to the next generation of our workforce, but also to the influencers of that workforce. I know Dr. Bertram is going to touch on this, but how can we work with guidance counselors, with educators, with parents in terms of changing perception of business, of industry, of manufacturing? So we get to this question of next steps. By now you're probably thoroughly depressed. We talked about the tight labor market. We talked about the damning demographic trends. We talked about the tight labor force. We talked about lowering fertility rates, lowering mobility rates, and now you're maybe sufficiently depressed. So today we're going to have a discussion, but what we do after today is that much more important. So right now we're already in the field. We're surveying our CEOs and many executives and thought leaders across the state, not just to talk about workforce and housing and broadband and leadership. What issues are we missing? What issues do we need to go deeper in? Where do we specifically need to focus? We're going to be in the field in Q1, again, conducting interviews. Many of you were interviewed for our workforce report. We're going to do the same thing in Q1 of this next year. And then probably Q2 or in the first half of 2020, we're going to release the Rural Wisconsin Report. And like I said, my commitment to you in this project, and this is my commitment to the thought leaders and investors in this work, is, hey, we're just going to be about two things. We're going to be data-driven, and we're going to be solutions-oriented. So once we identify recommendations, we're going to chase those down and work like heck to get those implemented. So in closing, let me just walk you through my math. 1 + 1 + 1 = 90. Kurt already mentioned this morning, Steve Johnson, the factory manager of John Deere, the chairman of our steering committee. We were in one of our meetings earlier this year, and Steve made the remark, at John Deere Horicon Works, we need to find about 90 more employees. In Horicon, you can't find 90 more employees. I don't care if you're in Madison or Milwaukee. It's hard to hire 90 more people. But what you can do is you probably can hire one. You probably can upskill another one. You probably can recruit another one. And you can partner with the National Association of Manufacturers in their FAME apprenticeship program. You can go to military bases across the country and partnering with WEDC and their veteran outreach efforts. You can work with Pastor Smith and the Joseph Project in terms of talent reintegration. You can work with your local technical colleges, work with your universities, with your private colleges, with your high schools, with your county business group, with your Chamber of Commerce. And you might not get to 90, but you can go 1 + 1, and then there's 3, and then there's 5. And so my point is this. This work and the work of economic opportunity, the work of workforce development, this isn't easy. As many of you know, heck, it's not always fun, but it certainly is impactful. So as you're here today, find one thing, find 2 things, find 3 things that you can take back to your campus, you can take back to your community, you can take back to your company. Because this might not be fun work, this is impactful work, and this is necessary work. So I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for your partnership, and I want to thank you for your engagement in this important work. I'm not only looking forward to the rest of the program today, I'm looking forward to next steps and as we chase this down in 2020. Thank you for being here.